What's going on, everyone? It's your boy, Adam, for episode number 26 of the Baseball World Today podcast. Hey, make sure you follow on YouTube and on Twitter. I'm just posting a YouTube video as we speak. That's different from just me talking over them. This is some actual kind of footage, I would say. So yeah, make sure you give those a look for sure. We are here today on a very sad, very disappointing, very horrible day, quite frankly. Andrew Benintendi was my favorite player on the Red Sox, and that trade kind of came as a shock, quite frankly. Now, we had heard for a while that he was kind of expected to be traded, but then it seemed like they got some positive feedback on him, and that wasn't going to happen. So I'm like, okay, I'm pretty happy about that because I could really envision him having a back year. Just because, we had kind of been waiting for him to have the year that we had been expecting for a while. Because really, outside of his first couple of years, he hasn't been as good as expected, quite frankly. Andrew Benintendi. He had certainly a couple good years, his rookie year and then his 2018 season, but never an OPS over 835. And this was a guy who, was a top 5 pick in the draft, and we kind of thought would be like an all-star level player. Now, he's only going to be in his age 26 season next year, but he just lost an entire season, basically due to injury, where he did not produce at all, only played 14 games. So the Red Sox make the decision in a 3-team trade to trade. Basically, they got traded Andrew Benintendi. The Royals get Andrew Benintendi. The Red Sox get Franchi. They get another starter/reliever from the Mets. And the Mets, let me just say really quickly, the Mets did really good in this trade because they traded a solid prospect for like a high-end prospect. So I think they came out really good in this trade. And all they really had to throw in was a player to be named later, I guess. The Red Sox do get 3 players to be named later. And the Red Sox will have time to make those picks from the other team. So those could end up being good players. But when I saw this, I wasn't sure what the Red Sox could possibly get from the Royals. I went through the team. I'm like, who do I even really want from this team? But I have to admit, seeing what the return is, I'm not happy with this trade because Andrew was one of my favorite players. But I'm certainly pretty excited about what the Red Sox got back, quite frankly. Franchi has been a top-level prospect for quite some time, especially with the Padres, and had a year with the Royals now. And he's just never gotten consistent playing time, but he has the power that'll make him at least an average hitter. This is a guy with a lot of tools, and honestly, I'm very excited to see him for a full season next year with the Red Sox. I honestly am very excited that as tough as it is to say, I gotta say, I think this is a good trade for the Red Sox. It hurts to say, but Benintendi only had 2 years left on his contract. Franchi had some more, and probably at this point, potentially more upside. One thing I will say is, a lot of people are saying, why trade him at the lowest value? Well, the thing is, even if he comes back and has like a 900 OPS till the All-Star break, his value really might not even get much higher because there's just less control time. So it makes sense in some ways why you do it now. I can understand people being upset that they do it now, but anyway, I am actually quite excited for the Red Sox in the trade. I actually think they pulled out really good in this, quite frankly. I think the Mets did really good in this. I am very surprised that the Royals did this, quite frankly, because they trade for Benintendi, but they're still pretty bad, even if he has a really good year next year. They have less years of control. They don't give up a lot, but they give up Franchi, a top prospect to the Mets, and 2 players to be named later, which, never know what those are going to be. Those could, a lot of the times, those don't end up being too much. But there's been, I mean, Cano was a player to be named later at one point, so you never really know. And yeah, I mean, like, I'm surprised that this man has only played like 95 games, only 16 with the Royals. I'm surprised they traded him already. So as much as I am upset as a Red Sox fan, I'm pretty happy with the result, quite frankly. I know a lot of people are going to think this is bad for the Red Sox. It shows them caving, but I mean, I understand that, but I honestly think this could really just be a plus for them because I certainly think there's potential that franchise could be better than Benintendi next year. Benintendi was terrible last year and has been struggling. His his stats have been declining. So, and these are both people in the same age, about to enter both their prime-ish years, but we have more control with Franchi. So, I gotta say, I don't think this is a bad trade at all for the Red Sox. One that really hurts me, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think this is a bad one at all. As many people are going to overreact and say, understandably so, but I kind of view this as view this as kind of a good trade for all the teams. I really think it's good for the Red Sox and Mets. It's a little confusing if you're the Royals, but I mean, I guess I kind of understand it, but man, as much, like I said, it hurts, but I think this is a really good trade for them. So to follow up with that segment, I'm going to talk about a couple more things with the Red Sox. One is that they signed a reliever from Japan, Sawamura, I believe his name is, and seems like a pretty good move, quite frankly, for only 2 years, $2 million. I mean, could you really go wrong with that, I guess, for a guy who had like a near 1 ERA in Japan? For that price, I don't think so. So, I mean, from the film, he looks like he has some good stuff, but, you never really know. So we have to ask now, what do we think of this Red Sox team? Because quite frankly, I could see them ending up fourth in the division, but that's kind of where I predicted right now. But I don't really think it would shock me too much if they ended up like in second place. Because like, let's just look through the team before anyone reacts. But let's start with the pitching staff. So let's start with the starters, particularly. Chris Sale is expected back in June. Okay, well, he hasn't been too good the last few years. But listen, at the end of the day, it's Chris Sale. So you kind of, if you have him, you kind of expect him to be good. And quite frankly, it might not be next year, but the year after, I expect him in 22 to be kind of back to himself after this. But even if he just has a solid year, that goes a long way. Then we got Eduardo Rodriguez. You look at any team and you see Chris Sale and Eduardo Rodriguez as the 1-2, you're going to think, okay, well, that's really not that bad, quite frankly. That's really not that bad, I got to say. So, but obviously, situations are a little different because I don't think either of them pitched last year because they were both hurt. So, yeah, I mean, you see that and you have some high hopes, but you got to remember that. But, the rest of the starting rotation, I low-key have kind of liked, honestly. So let's just go through them. Nate Eovaldi kind of had a little bit of a bounce back here, and I think he can improve a little bit more. So Nate has been obviously at the great 2018, but kind of struggled for a couple years, but he kind of reestablished himself a bit last year and came back in his own way, yeah, I believe. Then we have two signings, Martin Perez, who was solid last season, Garrett Richards, who is a high potential guy, gotta say, who had a solid year last year. Okay, I like him. I'm fine with him in like a 4 or 3 spot in the rotation. Martin Perez I don't really love, but he's very dependable, which is kind of something rotation needs. Then for this 5th spot, we probably will have Nick Pivetta since he's out of options. A guy who I think has a lot of potential and was extremely good once he was traded to the Red Sox and was able to pitch in September. But there's also a guy like Tanner Houck who came up also in September, and Pivetta and Houck had like 75% of the pitching decisions for the Red Sox in the entire year in like 7 starts. So, I mean, they really showed what they can do, but yeah. Then we have the bullpen, which I think is kind of underratedly good, quite frankly. Matt Barnes, I don't love, but he's definitely solid. Ottavino, I'm expecting a good year out of. Josh Taylor and Darwin Hernandez, I both really like. I love them both. Brian Brazier had a really good second half of the season last year. Matt Andrees is okay. Sawarama, we'll have to see. And then Phillips Valdez had an incredible year last year. So, yeah, I mean, then we know the lineup. I really think this lineup the lineup is, frankly, really good if JD Martinez hits. It's really all about that. If JD hits like he's possible, like his 40 home run level, then I think it's a really good lineup. And then I think we're saying, okay, this team can be really good. But we got to remember they play in a stat day league. Like, listen, I think this lineup really is going to come down to JD Martinez. And if he's good, then I think this Red Sox team has the potential to do a lot of good stuff. Now, they kind of are missing a player right now, quite frankly. So the infield is kind of set, but in the outfield, they kind of need an extra guy. So they have Verdugo, Center, Franchi, and Renfroe. Renfroe is really only meant to be a play against in the right situation guy. So, okay, so what did they do? Well, a lot of people are saying that they could sign Jackie. Quite frankly, I would kind of hate that because the Red Sox do have a really top prospect, Jaron Duran, which they expect to be up soon. I don't think signing Jackie to any sort of long-term deal would really make sense. Okay, maybe if it's a one-year deal, but I think it's kind of time to move on to that. Rival executives, quote-unquote, have been saying, oh, that seems more likely to happen. I don't really ever believe when I hear rival executives say anything because they don't really know what's happening behind closed doors of the other team. So I never really take that for anything, but you can take it for whatever you want it to be. So, yeah. I honestly think it's time for them to move on. So I'm not sure what other direction they could go. Maybe a trade, maybe just even bridging the hole by signing a guy like Pilar or whoever else. But, I mean, having one weaker outfield spot is not going to be the end of the world of this lineup, I think. They really could just kind of use a defender and be fine out there because I think Verdugo is definitely an above average player in the outfield, and Franchi, I think, definitely has the potential too. So they almost just need the combination of Renfroe and another guy could honestly just be a solid mid-level spot in the outfield, I think. So, yeah, I feel like this team has a kind of wide margin for wins/losses. Like, they could possibly be like around an 85 to 90 win team, I think. But it's kind of more likely that they're around the 75. So, I mean, like, there's a big gap of like 10 to 15 wins that will decide this, obviously, come from like JD Martinez. Like, is he really good? Okay, is Eduardo able to pitch all year? Can the low end of the rotation hold up? Is the bullpen going to be like I think it is? It's kind of a team that I feel like it's hard to predict right now, but certainly if the right things happen, I think this team has a lot of pieces in place that it still definitely could be good, quite frankly. So, yeah, that's just my take on it. Another thing we'll talk about quickly is the Mets and Bryant. So apparently Chris Bryant has some interest from the Mets again. But a report today came out that apparently they almost non-tendered Bryant. Could you imagine that? Like, if he had gotten non-tendered, that would just be so poor by the Cubs. Anyway, luckily they didn't. But the problem is now they're asking for like a top prospect from the Mets after non-tendering him. And that just can't happen if you're the Mets. Apparently David Peterson could be in the deal, but I think if you're the Mets, you gotta get Hendricks in that deal too, quite frankly, if you're gonna give him up. So now, however, if you give up David Peterson and get Hendricks and Bryant, well then the Mets are just gonna be a really good team, quite frankly. Then the Mets are just gonna be a really good team. And then the Cubs will be a really bad team. And something interesting to talk about later is with the projections, they're projected to be quite good right now, but we'll talk about that in a moment and why I don't really think that. But, I mean, listen, if the Mets were to bring in Hendricks, their rotation would be pretty good. Honestly, is Hendricks that much worse than Trevor Bauer? I mean, for the value, for $40 million, I think Hendricks is just going to be fine. So I really think with him in the rotation, then we're looking really serious for the Mets. I'm not sure if the Cubs, I say if you're the Cubs and you can get Peterson, even if it meant giving up if you could get Peterson, even if it means give up Hendricks and Bryant, we got to remember Bryant only has 1 year left on his deal. So Peterson is steep asking, I feel like, but I think if you can get Peterson for the Cubs, you kind of got to do it, even if it means giving up Hendricks too. So we'll see if the Mets can do that. Maybe they just want to do like a little better investing and sign Turner if that's possible. But I have a feeling the Mets are going to end up with a really good third baseman in the quite future, quite frankly.